I don't see a universe where somebody can have maximal optimal health without fasting. There is a ton of parallel between fasting and calorie restriction. In fact, fasting is the most extreme version of calorie restriction. We do need to make it easier for people. GLP-1 medications like semaglutide, like tirzepatide, I can get people into a 48-hour fast within 3 to 6 weeks. And then if they add something like AOD, 1 to 3. I think a lot of people can get into that pretty easily, but for some people they can't. For some people, when they first try to skip their 8 a.m. breakfast, for example, even just 2 hours, they get hangry. For the first time ever, we have the medication that actually gets the root cause of insulin resistance. This is why GLP-1 medications are so amazing.
And to understand the juxtaposition here, when you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people all on GLPs, seeing great results, what is the determining factor between fasting with GLP-1s and just everything else, just taking the GLP-1s? Why is it so essential, and why do you see differences with this application specifically?
I actually think that
All right, man, today I'm going to start off with a little bit of a challenge, okay? GLP-1s and fasting. Sounds great to most listeners, I'm sure. Maybe scary, but great. I can't get over the fact that when you look at GLP-1s, we know that one of the main mechanisms, what makes it so great, is they can lower your blood sugar. But we also know that fasting, obviously, can have the same exact effect. So how can you take two actions that accomplish the same thing physiologically and not feel like you're risking some type of health consequence for anybody who decides to do this?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think safety is always of utmost importance. When you look at diabetic medications, there are certain diabetic medications that will continue to lower your blood sugar, and it will be dependent upon the dose, meaning the more of the medication you take, the lower and lower your blood sugar will go. And there's no end to that. There's no point at which the medication, the increase in the dose, won't stop dropping your blood sugar. That's really important to know. Not all diabetic medications are like that. Insulin would be a great example of something that is potentially very dangerous. Diabetics obviously are very comfortable with injecting themselves regularly, but even then, you hear it all the time of hospitalizations of accidental overdosing of their injections. Insulin is a very powerful blood sugaring medication, and on its own, if injected too much, can put somebody in the hospital. We have something like insulin. But then you have other diabetic medications, and GLP-1s are just as much a diabetic medication as they are an obesity and metabolic health medication. These medications will lower your blood sugar up to a certain point, and really just up to a healthy range. And this is what makes this medication so unique. It doesn't continue to go. Even as you increase the dose, it will not drop your blood sugar in almost every cases down to these concerning hypoglycemic areas. And, we coach thousands of people, and I'm seeing them all the time, and we almost never get cases of hypoglycemic issues happening. And we're seeing patients with massively high A1C blood sugar, A1C being the measurement of blood sugar over the last 90 days. We're seeing massive reduction of blood sugar. So these medications, while very powerful, like insulin, at driving a person's blood sugar down, it also has this amazing ability of somehow not continuing to drop it beyond the lower ideal range, which is awesome. Now, fasting, completely different thing. We're not talking about a medication at all. We're simply talking about the absence of eating. And who would have thought something as amazing as fasting can be that powerful? Also, in this sort of similar fashion, your body has amazing mechanisms at the same time to, when you don't eat, not letting your blood sugar drop to the point where you become hypoglycemic. You have built-in mechanisms. This is why fasting for some people can be very easy and why fasting for other people can be very challenging. No one's talking about this being a rodeo. No one's talking about this being a piece of cake, no pun intended. But for some people, it's much easier. A very metabolically fit person, or somebody who's not as fit, something that they can work towards and become better at as they become more metabolically fit. But nonetheless, in most cases, people with fasting on its own right are not going to become hypoglycemic. The combination of both, I can tell you, because my medical practitioners are very comfortable with this, they prescribe the GLP-1s, and we're putting almost everybody that's in our FLOA protocol on a fasting regimen. And I know we're going to talk about what that looks like and the intensity of it, but we're talking really powerful fasting regimens outside of a few diabetics who were doing this program in conjunction with their doctors because they were on diabetic lowering medications at the same time with GLP-1, with fasting. Those are the only times that we've had issues of patients where their blood sugar did drop, they felt it, and so we had to be more careful.
And to understand the juxtaposition here, when you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people all on GLPs, seeing great results, what is the determining factor between fasting with GLP-1s and just everything else, just taking the GLP-1s? Like, why is it so essential, and why do you see differences with this application specifically?
Simply put, fasting to me, even without GLP-1s, if we just zoomed out, I look at pillars of optimal health and pillars of lasting weight loss. I don't see a universe where somebody can have maximal optimal health without fasting. Lo and behold, GLP-1 medications make fasting easier. That's the difficulty with fasting. I mean, everybody would love to do something that they could actually do if they knew it benefited them. And there's no argument that fasting has amazing benefits. There's a ton of data that validates its effectiveness. There's controversy over whether fasting versus calories, what's actually doing the benefits. And, we've talked about that. And I look forward to actually, debunking that on future episodes. But the aspect outside of fat burning and what's better for you, we know from a health perspective, there's so many different health benefits happening for fasting. To me, it was just kind of like a light bulb when I first learned about GLP-1 medications years ago. I was like, wait a minute, we have this thing that massively suppresses appetite. It's not like phentermine, which is pretty harsh on the body, something that we can't take often or at all, really, for many people with cardiovascular issues. I'm like, we just found an awesome tool to make fasting easier. It was sort of like this automatic thing for me when I first learned about GLP-1 medications. And so really, going back to your question, why fast on GLP-1s? To enhance the results. And that kind of leads to a secondary aspect is if we can enhance the results of GLP-1 medications, not only are we just enhancing the results, but maybe we don't need as much of the medication to begin with. Holy crap, wouldn't that be awesome if we could actually do something simultaneous, the drugs, simultaneous the treatments, right? Why does this have to be a monotherapy? Why can't this be multiple therapies? And that's the way I think GLP-1 medications should be used, is not as a monotherapy, not as a solo therapy, but in conjunction with many lifestyle strategies outside of fasting. We're going to talk just about fasting, but there's many, many more pieces to it. I spend so much time talking about fasting because it seems like fasting is the most controversial. I would say a great deal because of what you talked about earlier, the concern. But even outside of GLP-1 concern, there are still people that think fasting is not ideal. There's still people that think human beings were meant to eat 4 to 5 small meals a day. And I'm flabbergasted when I look at the physiology of the body, the function of the body, and I just think ancestral times, the majority of human history, humans had to fast, and they had to fast for very long periods of time, very consistently inconsistent. It makes sense when you look at the ability for the body to be able to consume large quantities of food, store that massive additional energy in the form of body fat, which is a vesicle for fuel to feed you for future periods of time. Like humans could run months without food as long as they have water and oxygen because of this mechanism called body fat, and our ability to not only store it, which everybody's really good at storing body fat, but where everybody has lost is the ability to tap into that, which we're going to talk about. We call that metabolic flexibility. So I'm just getting people back into the rhythm of various mechanisms within their body, fat burning, and really tapping into it, because ketogenic diets are awesome. And ketogenic diet is similar to fasting in terms of also really turning on fat burning. It's a next level thing. Burning pure fat when all you're eating is fat, you're challenging your body, absolutely, because you're not in carb burning, but you are eating the fat. So there's less stress on the body. But now asking your body to mobilize its fat stores as if it was eating, eat a buffet from its own body, and then utilize it, that takes to the next level.
So that all actually makes perfect sense to me. The old personal trainer inside of me, I understand, makes sense, but I'm still worried about the long-term aspect of this lifestyle decision, meaning not just with people taking tirzepatide and retatrutide, but anyone on a consistent caloric deficit. Over time, as they're eating less, their metabolism is going to catch up, it's going to downregulate, and you're left with someone who has a worse metabolism, a worse appetite, and almost every time you see a rebound. And I think about fasting making that severe caloric deficit over time even worse. In all reality, how do you parse that out, and how do you fix the potential for that stagnation of the metabolism?
This leads right into the calories versus hormones debacle. So I'll say that hour-long discussion for a different episode. But I think I'm glad you brought it up, because it's important to understand that, and it makes sense as to why I'm such an advocate for fasting. There is a ton of parallel between fasting and calorie restriction. In fact, fasting is the most extreme version of calorie restriction. The only difference is fasting is a controlled time frame through which you are restricting your calories. Calorie restriction has no end. The general approach towards calorie restriction is, for example, 200, 300, 500 calories. I'm going to be in a deficit, whether I'm eating 500 calories less, whether I'm burning 500 more, or whether I'm doing a combination of both. I'm in a daily caloric deficit of 500, which is much less of a stress to the body compared to not eating at all. Average person didn't exercise, would be about 2,000 calories, significantly more stressful and more challenging for the body, relatively less, much less stressful. But it's the consistency. Day 2, day 3, week 1, week 2, month 1, month 2. Mm-hmm. Like you said, personal training days back in the day, we see it happen all the time before GLP-1 medications, because people before GLP-1s were not starving themselves. That was a very challenging thing to do. Successful people that would follow the protocol, we got them burning a lot of calories, we got them eating less. Eventually, we see a lot of metabolic downregulation. We see metabolism slow down. So that mechanism is very, very powerful. And it will happen with fasting too. Mm-hmm. This is where the nuance comes in. Mm-hmm. What I've figured out is the most effective way to fast where we can mitigate that, where we can prevent that from happening in most cases. So in a pure fast ongoing, how many days would it take for most people to hit that sort of plateau? If you're not eating, usually after 3 days, you start to get to it, and somewhere between 4 to 5, you have the same kind of metabolic downregulation that you would have for in a standard sort of caloric deficit, which is highly variable. Some people can be in a caloric deficit and never plateau. Mm-hmm. Eventually, I think they would eventually, but yeah, it seems like they lose all their weight before they plateau, and then you have other people within a month. Here, in a full-blown fast, it's actually pretty interesting. And within like 3 to 5 days, mm-hmm. you'll start to have some massive metabolic downregulation. From a health perspective, there's still an insane amount of benefits from doing the 5-day, from doing the 7-day. I've seen all sorts of crazy things. But number one, you ain't going to do that consistently, consecutively, and you can't be wrecking your metabolism that often anyways. So I think that's more of a semi-annual or annual kind of approach, fasting beyond 5 days. What can we do for regular weight loss? It needs to be more consistent. Mm-hmm. And so I remember when I was first playing around with myself and trying to figure this out, monthly or weekly were the only increments. Bi-weekly too as well. A monthly kind of ruled that out really quickly. I'm like, okay, you're not gonna do like a 7-day fast once a month. That's not practical. I looked at bi-weekly, still didn't seem so. Weekly made the most amount of sense as far as an increment of time. And 48 hours. 48 hours is massive. A lot of people are still like 48 a week. I mean, it's pretty unconventional in a fasting, which is already unconventional, so to speak, compared to, the standard practice of eating. So here's getting to your question. How do we not plateau? Mm-hmm. You hit the body with a 48-hour fast. It's a powerful stimulus. You get all the benefits, which we'll talk about later. Mm-hmm. But as far as just calorie restriction, it's not enough for most people for their body to all of a sudden think, I need to downregulate yet. It's not starvation mode when you first do that. But what do you do the next 5 days? Mm-hmm. So this is absolutely crucial, and this is why my book is called Fast, Feast, and Flourish. We are balancing or countering the fast with a feast. The feast doesn't need to be a surplus of calories per se, but you need to be hitting around the TEE. So TEE, total energy expenditure, is supposed to be a representative number of how many calories an individual can eat over a 24-hour period, and it accounts for how much they're exercising. It's like an algorithm. You plug in some various metrics like height, weight, and activity, and it spits out a number, usually around 2,000, 2,500. And so people in my program are eating at their TEE, somewhere around 2,000, 2,200, for example, and hitting that for 5 days. There's no research behind the FLOA protocol. I'm hoping one day that I could utilize what I'm doing and have some studies performed on my approach towards fasting. My gosh, I would love this. But from what I can see, what I think we're doing is we're hitting the body, the brain specifically. Your hypothalamus is the area of the brain that's sort of detecting these caloric trends. And so what I imagine is happening is we're hitting the hypothalamus with 5 days of no caloric deficit. So it's almost like it gets shocked with the caloric deficit from the 48-hour fast, but then it gets 5 days of like, oh, things are cool. That was just a one-off. Bam, then you hit it again. Bam, then you hit it again. Bam, then you hit it again. Every single week, you're hitting your body with the most extreme caloric deficit you can, over the shortest period of time, which would be a long fast by definition. And then you balance it with TEE of eating, getting a high amount of protein and repeating that cycle every 7 days. And I can tell you, I noticed a significant reduction, almost non-existent, in people who are actually following the protocol, getting into a plateau. Almost, I would say 90% of the people that do get a plateau are the individuals who, when we dig into it, because they're on tirzepatide, they're on semaglutide, and they're like, yeah, I was not eating my TE. I was not eating 2,000 calories on the other 5 days. I was fasting for 48 hours. And then lo and behold, I was eating like 1,400. So that's the caveat. That's where GLP-1 medications can work against you in my program. If you're doing my program without GLP-1 medications, it's much harder to get into the rhythm, to get into the 48-hour fast. Very possible, but harder. But then you're not going to undereat on the other 5 days. You will be hungry after a 48-hour fast. You're not undereating unless you're on GLP-1 medications. In that case, it just takes some mental fortitude, some awareness, some idea. You don't have to count calories. Once you know, like, okay, I counted for 3 weeks, I know what 2,000 looks like, you have some conscious awareness that you can estimate that you're eating somewhere around 2,000 calories. And so all you got to do is just make sure you're hitting somewhere around 2,000 the other 5 days. You have that awareness, you rock and roll.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I can't help but think about, you know this, I do one meal a day, at least Monday through Friday most days. This week I have, or at least meals between 5 and 8. To say that it was a painful process, even for me, to get to that point where I can talk to you right now in the middle of the day, not be hungry, not be thinking of food, be completely mentally cognizant and full of energy. I mean, it was over a year to even be able to go from intermittent fasting to what I do now. How much easier is it now that you had GLP-1s to aid you? Like, what is, for the average person, the typical transition time that you see, and how does it, comparatively to like what I go through, what the average person goes through, not with the assistance of GLPs, what's the difference there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I mean, this was 20 years ago when I was really pushing the envelope of fasting myself. And so, yeah, no GLP-1 medications. Yeah, it is a mental push. But I was younger, so I don't think it was nearly as bad as somebody who's been obese and 35 or 45 or 55.
Right.
So I did have age in my benefit there. But yeah, I think the more metabolically busted you are, the more challenging it is for sure. But even for a healthy individual, like, it is a mental challenge to get into a 48-hour fast. So it's all mindset. It's all mindset. And I truthfully think, to quote David Coggins, anything's possible. You look at that guy. Most people, though, don't have anywhere near the kind of mental fortitude that David Coggins has. And so because of that, we do need to make it easier for people. GLP-1 medications like semaglutide, like tirzepatide, I can get people into a 48-hour fast within 3 to 6 weeks. And then if they add something like AOD, like 1 to 3. I mean, I get people that are like, I'm just going to try it. Like, I just want to dive in. I saw your videos, Dr. Jones, and I went all in. Even with GLP-1s and AODs, it's not going to happen the first time for most people, but it can happen pretty quickly because they went head first, and I always respect and appreciate that. And, this is where the coaching comes into play. If someone has an autoimmune disease, if someone's in a very stressful point in their life, I'll tell them, hey, let's, I love the fact that you want to go, but let's dial it back. In addition to poor metabolic health, because they're all overweight and poor metabolic health, but lack of an autoimmune disease, lack of other, comorbidities, if you will, then they can maybe go faster. But if they have a lot of that stuff going on, we'll generally advise them to kind of take their time with it. Over a 1 to 3 week period.
Okay. Can you, I thought of this as you were speaking, because we haven't really touched on it yet, and it's probably resonating with a lot of people. The idea that fasting is even good for you in the first place. I mean, I grew up believing breakfast was the most important meal of the day. Just yesterday, someone told me that she's been at a plateau for a long time, and their trainer has her eating protein within 30 minutes of waking up to activate, literally what she told me, activate her metabolism. And everyone's heard this, right? If you want to go to school and get good grades and perform well in tests, you got to eat a healthy breakfast, right? And there's a lot of people out there that are hearing this conversation saying, absolutely not, because I need my energy, I need my health. It's not good not to have breakfast, right? Answer that. What do you have to say to them in a way where they're actually going to understand the opposite side of the coin here?
Yeah, for sure. It's very logical and sensical
Mhm.
to, I mean, you can apply this concept to everything in life, but we're just talking about health. If you're trying to do something and you feel like it's making you worse,
Mhm.
the logical thing is stop doing the thing that makes you feel worse. And for some people, skipping just breakfast, the easiest form of fasting would be skipping breakfast and starting your meal at 12. That's intermittent fasting. That's not even long fasting. I think a lot of people can get into that pretty easily. But for some people, they can't. For some people, when they first try to skip their 8 a.m. breakfast, for example, even just 2 hours, they get hangry, right? You've seen that Snickers commercial where that happens, when they get all crazy and they turn to Danny DeVito and they're like getting all cranky and stuff. Like that's a real thing, and their blood sugar could be dropping. They could be becoming hypoglycemic, so they could be a non-diabetic whose their body is just so stressed out that it can't even keep its blood sugar high enough at just a couple hours of not eating. Does that mean that there's some genetic variation and their body isn't built with the same mechanisms in their body? Because that would be implausible. I'm sitting here as a scientist coming up with different theories to try to figure out why is there certain people that react that fiercely versus other people that could just ride into it? Okay, well, that's a valid theory, right? Maybe this is a genetic variation in their body. Oh, well, there's been research and we've never found any sort of metabolic variation in the way that their metabolism functions, and they don't have the ability to burn fat, because that's what we're talking about here, right? Skipping a meal like that just means being able to tap into the stored carbohydrates and tap into the glycogen first, because you don't even necessarily need to tap into body fat until 16 hours into a fast, give or take. And by the way, the sugar fat burning doesn't work that linear where it's all carbs and then fat. There's always a little bit of both, but metabolic flexibility increases the variability in which your body can alternate. And so, yeah, it is almost that linear for people that are really, really screwed up and their body can only tap into carbs first. So we rule out, right, I just have this unique human variation, right? And okay, well then what's the next explanation? Maybe my body just sucks at tapping into fat. Like, okay, we've seen people who suck at lifting weights. We've seen people that are just naturally extremely weak. And does that mean you're individually weak person who is just weaker than everybody at the gym? It hurts when they lift weights. Are we saying that they can't grow? No, we know that. We know every person, you put them on a weight training, almost 100% of people are going to have a stimulus from the body where they grow. It might not be very visible to the naked eye over a long time, but eventually, with enough training, their muscles grow and adapt. Metabolic flexibility, which is what you need, fat adaptation, is no different. It's just a bumpier road for some people. So you just got to understand, to answer your question now, if you are an individual, you're not genetically different, structurally different than anybody else, and you have the machinery in your body to do what everyone else does, but you need to train this machine. You bought this chainsaw, it's sitting in your garage, it's super rusty, you've never turned it on for 30, 40, 50 years, and now you want to turn that puppy on. All right, well, you better oil it up. You better take your time and do whatever the hell you need to do to chainsaws in order to get them working again, because the benefits, if you're wondering why, we'll get into all that. The benefits to be had are absolutely amazing. You just need to erase the sensical thought process of, am I hurting my body because I feel like shit? Okay, well, you don't need to feel like shit. You don't need to be suffering. You just need to figure out how to go about it where you can challenge yourself, but it's a controlled amount of stress. It should be challenging, but it shouldn't be deleterious to your health. You shouldn't feel like confusion, exhaustion, and cold sweats and essentially hypoglycemia. You can do this without having to become medically hypoglycemic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But there's tips and tricks that we do for people like that.
Okay. I'm trying to sit here throwing you curveballs and you keep swinging away. Just to shoot, that was a great answer. So then let's talk about realistic expectations and benefits. Why do this in the first place? So if I took 100 people, typical GLP-1 users, got the prescription, take it once a week, that's it, losing weight, not eating, okay? On average, what is their experience going to be like long-term compared to someone who does the exact same thing and implements the appropriate lifestyle changes, mainly fasting?
Are you asking a GLP-1 user that does fasting versus a GLP-1 user that doesn't do fasting?
Yeah. The average GLP-1 user in mass, most people versus somebody doing the FLOA protocol.
Okay.
What can they expect? What's going to happen that's going to be so different, both short term and long term?
On the short term, you are going to get faster results. So without a doubt, why this matters is because while some people get really fast results without the intermittent fasting, but with the intermittent fasting, there are shifts in your hormones that produce more favorable results. See, weight loss is actually broken down into two different categories: fat loss and muscle, which, they categorize it with the bones and all that, but essentially muscle and fat. And the game that you're trying to play for optimal health is reducing fat, specifically visceral, if we have time to get into that, but fat, while protecting muscle mass. And for most people, they don't even have enough muscle mass in their body now. Yes, the more overweight you are, the more muscle mass you have in your body. Some people, especially people that have done GLP-1 medications, have freaking lost weight and regained it and actually lost a lot of the muscle mass they already have on their body. That's what we want to do. We want to protect muscle mass and we want to keep the fat loss churning. We have a big shift in our hormones that are going to make it more favorable for muscle sparing. So let's get into that first. Let's talk about the muscle sparing effect. I know a lot of people will say, how is fasting muscle sparing, right? It actually is. Hormones play a huge role. Testosterone, growth hormone, there's so many. A lot of them have a positive and sometimes even a negative impact on muscle. But the bigger variable, whether an individual grows a muscle, maintains it, or loses it, at the end of the day is calories. That's the most powerful stimulus. Whether you're fasting aggressively, so on a weekly basis, you're on a massive caloric deficit, or whether you're not fasting at all, but you're barely eating because you're on a GLP-1 medication and no one's guiding you, you're still on a massive weekly caloric deficit. So either scenario, you're going to lose massive amounts of muscle mass. So we just got to be clear. Whether you're doing GLP-1 medications or whether you're doing my program with fasting, we're teaching you how to eat and we're teaching you how much to eat. If you're eating enough around the fasting, you're not in that caloric deficit that's going to cause that muscle mass loss. And now, since you're not getting that negative impact, you're going to get the hormetic improvement that fasting delivers. That's the caveat. That's the nuance. Is you have to do fasting right. What that really means is eating enough calories, eating enough protein surrounding your fasting windows. And it's very different if you're doing intermittent fasting versus the flow, which we're going to talk about, I know in a bit, which is longer rounds of fasting. It's very, very different in that scenario, but there's still the same concept of eating enough calories, eating enough protein to complement and surround. So the changes in the hormones, you have an increase in growth hormone, which is freaking awesome. Growth hormone is very, very powerful for not only in improving fat loss itself, but also muscle preservation and muscle building. You could use growth hormone in a caloric surplus program to help you build more muscle mass, which is really cool. Long fasting will also cause this nervous system reaction. They call it the sympathetic nervous system, which is like your fight or flight. Like you think of an emergency situation, your sympathetic nervous system is what kicks in and it puts you on alert mode and it's heightened senses. You're burning more calories. Like it's not a place that you want to be all the time. But you certainly appreciate the ability for your body to turn that on in the moment of a tiger, right? They always say that catecholamines are the specific hormones that get released, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and these fight or flight hormones not only increase your metabolic rate, which is awesome, but it increases beta oxidation because, again, your body wants to be in a situation where it has the energy to fuel whatever urgent reaction, usually running or sprinting, needs to happen in the situation. And then finally, ketone bodies. So ketone bodies are a metabolite or a byproduct, if you will, of the restriction of carbohydrates in your diet. And when your body goes into deep fat burning mode, it's actually oxidizing and burning and utilizing ketone bodies. So when you're burning fat, your body is utilizing, especially in a state when carbohydrates aren't present, your body is running off ketone bodies. So ketone bodies, you've heard a lot about, you can actually buy ketone bodies as a supplement too as well. Different source of fuel. They call it clean fuel. And it really is clean fuel. And what that really means is the free radical production is much lower when your body's in a state of ketosis. And so your body is actually able to heal more. It reduces inflammation. It functions better because there is more free radicals. Free radicals are like bad things that get produced from all sorts of the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, and they scavenge the cells in your body, and they're stealing electrons from other cells, and they're causing a cascade of problems that ultimately is not good for the diet, for the body, and for the health. Things like antioxidants. That's why I say eat, colorful fruits and vegetables to get antioxidants will help reduce free radical production. Also, your body being better at fat burning means lower antioxidant production. If you're getting all your calories from carbohydrates, you are producing more free radicals by definition. That's really awesome. Where I was going with that is the presence of ketone bodies are also anti-metabolic and that protect your muscle mass against breakdown. Contrary to what seems very sensical, fasting, when done right, is actually favorable towards muscle tissue.
That makes a lot more sense to me. The one thing that would ever hold me back from allowing, let's say, a family member that was overweight to get on a GLP-1 program without direction would be the rapid weight loss they would experience without realizing they were destroying their metabolism. As soon as they would come off, they'd gain the weight back and be actually worse off than before. And you describing how somebody actually becomes more fat adapted by using fasting is, it's incredible. And two of my other favorite facets of fasting, ever since I learned about John Berardi, 2012, when they started learning about, one, autophagy and inflammation and the general healing, and then two, addressing insulin resistance, which a lot of practitioners see as the root cause for the majority of debilitating diseases and conditions, right? So can you speak on the autophagy and speak on the insulin resistance and why fasting is a way to improve both?
Yeah, absolutely. Insulin resistance, I'll start there. I think that's actually a more important piece, although it's hard to say that cellular autophagy and healing isn't important. But so insulin resistance is, like you said, the starting point of the top 10 killers, almost every major disease that ultimately leads to cancer, obesity, cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance you can find at the beginning, at the onset. This is why GLP-1 medications are so amazing, is because for the first time ever, we have a tool, we have a medication that actually gets to the root cause of insulin resistance. We've never had any medication get to any sort of root cause. We only have medications that mask symptoms, and now we have something that actually is getting to the root cause. I actually think that if GLP-1 medications were prescribed to people at the early onset of insulin resistance, you would put statin companies, blood pressure medications, diabetic medications completely out of business. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? Because I honestly think that the majority of the need for those medications are downstream of poor metabolic health, which if the GLP-1 medication was introduced early with lifestyle, I think people can probably still override the GLP-1 with a horrible lifestyle. GLP-1 given early with a little bit of education, right? Those medications, which is just an insane reality to ponder, makes me imagine this sort of pharmaceutical battles that are going to happen here in the near distant future, because I know that those companies are aware of that fact and they're, God knows, what they're doing. It's interesting to think about pharmaceutical companies, as much as they, do what they got to do against the public, what they probably do against each other is anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. Insulin resistance creates this condition known as hyperinsulinemia, which hyperinsulinemia just means chronically elevated insulin levels. Insulin is the primary storage hormone in the body, not just when people think of blood sugar, but it stores sugar, it's carbohydrates, it stores fat, it stores protein. Bodybuilders are literally sometimes resorting to injecting insulin, which is very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous because they're insulin sensitive. So a diabetic has to, it's a much smaller margin of error for a bodybuilder who is very insulin sensitive to inject insulin versus a type 2 diabetic who's insulin dependent. I would actually love to research and the number of differences, but I would guess somewhere between 5 to 15 times the amount. I really, really think I'll actually research that and see if I can figure that answer out, but significantly more. And so much more dangerous for the bodybuilder, especially too, because they're not used to injecting insulin, maybe with the exception of some of those pro card, athletes. But nonetheless, that's how powerful of a storage hormone insulin is. Despite that, in a healthy individual, they don't have elevated insulin levels all the time. In fact, it's very transient, right? You eat 3, even in a situation when you're eating 6 meals a day, which is not optimal. By the way, fasting is so amazing. But even in those situations, 6 meals a day out of a 24-hour period, you still have insulin being much lower for the majority of the day still. But when you become insulin resistant, Now your body is making more insulin because insulin resistance, as the name implies, means your cells are becoming resistant to insulin. And so your body's only function, your only option for your body is to keep insulin elevated all the time to get the job done. So now you have this very weird situation where insulin is just elevated all the time. And you can actually test and catch this on a marker, blood marker called fasting insulin, and C-peptide verifies that. Humans were not meant to have insulin elevated all the time. Well, what do you think that does to the body? If it's such a powerful storage hormone and you have that 24/7, that signal, store, grow. And people wonder where food chatter comes from. By definition, you look at what food chatter is. It's this constant craving and even mental preoccupation for food. When am I going to eat? I'm not satisfied. I want to eat more. What do we notice with diabetics and insulin resistance patients? They have the food chatter. They're tired. Well, of course they're tired. Their body is metabolically inflexible. Well, if I'm a growth signal, I would want to get the cells to be very inefficient. I wouldn't want them to expend calories. I would want to turn things down. I want to turn down the metabolism. And that's exactly what happens. And so insulin's doing its job. It's just not meant to be there hitting the signal of grow, which makes you more hungry and makes you more tired, makes you more lethargic. We're not meant to have that 24/7. The ramifications of that are the body's working against you. We talk about calories, we talk about hormones. The response of some people is like, well, you just eat in a caloric deficit and you're guaranteed to lose weight. On the short term, yes, that is very true. But it is very, very different to go into a caloric deficit and have hyperinsulinemia at the same time, elevated insulin levels, to go in the same caloric deficit and not have chronically elevated insulin levels. It is a completely different scenario. In scenario 1, elevated insulin levels, your body's working against you. Versus scenario 2, your body's working with you. Same caloric deficit, but when your body's working with you, okay, let's keep burning fat. No problem. Stress is down. Just keep eating at a deficit and I'll keep burning fat. Number 1, now you have insulin trying to do everything it possibly can to stop the caloric deficit from continuing. It could literally cause you to eat more by making you massively more hungry, back to food chatter, and also downregulating the metabolism. Have we seen that before? Have we talked about zombie mode? Have we talked about metabolisms, people barely eating and not losing weight because their metabolisms are cranking down so quickly? So this is a very powerful mechanism. And I think you'll never achieve lasting weight loss without becoming insulin sensitive. While GLP-1 medications do that in their own right, we also have FLOA protocol fasting that also does that. For me, I want people to achieve stability in their weight, independence from medications, or maybe even achieve stability with microdosing, which I know we have another podcast that we're going to do about that, where they're able to maintain their weight with a much lower dose or spread out over a longer period of time. So insulin resistance, very, very important. And so now bringing it back to fasting, what creates the insulin resistance to begin with, right? Because now we're going to bring it back to fasting. Many theories, many ideas, lifestyle, right? The absence of the things that would help lower your blood sugar and the addition of the things that would spike blood sugar. What we eat is one of the biggest contributing factors. There's only 3 sources of calories: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Fat is very negligible. Protein is low, but carbohydrates are the thing that spikes insulin very high. Spikes blood sugar, spikes insulin. What are the 2 forms of not eating carbohydrates? Ketogenic diet and fasting. Fasting is much more powerful than a ketogenic diet. When we look at fasting, what's the most powerful form of fasting? Intermittent or long? Long form fasting. Okay, great. What long form fasting can I actually do consecutively without getting the deleterious effects and the negative impacts? That's what the FLOA protocol is, which I know we haven't got into that yet, and I know we're running out of time, but that's where we're fasting for 36 to 48 hours, capped off, and then we eat a lot of calories, a lot of nutrition, and a lot of protein the rest of the week, and we repeat that cycle. That's what we're trying to do, is lower your insulin levels via diet, or the absence of a diet, I guess I would say, over a repetitive period in fashion, so that your insulin resistance can heal, which in turn will lower insulin levels more.
Okay. Understand that piece of it. How do you see the autophagy, the cellular autophagy playing in? Let's say I've lived a completely healthy life. I've never touched any processed food. I've never smoked. I've never drank. But hell, I've lived here. I've still been exposed to toxins and BPAs and other contaminants, right? I'm a huge fan of cellular healing. And there seems to be so much, I don't want to say debate. It seems like there's a very clear section of individuals who absolutely believe in the power of autophagy. Then there's the more traditionally leaning practitioners that say it really isn't that much of a benefit. Where do you stand?
I think autophagy is absolutely amazing. And I think it's one of the many reasons why we had much less chronic disease in the past. One of the many reasons. Cellular autophagy is a process in which your cells are repairing themselves. The human body is a bunch of cells and organs, right? And the organs really are a cluster of tissues, and tissues are clusters of cells. The cells themselves, which biology defines as the smallest basic unit of life, have their own organs. They're called organelles. The cell itself, the overall effectiveness of that cell would be the summation of the organelles themselves and how well each organelle is functioning. Well, at any given moment, a cell is not going to be, they're all not functioning and humming around at 100%. No, that'd be amazing, right? That doesn't work like that in real life. All your cells are all at their own various levels of effectiveness. Who knows? I would love to see a way to quantify that. But at any given moment, you'll find some cells which are doing better than others because they have certain organelles that are doing better than others. Your body is in a constant state of repair and build. So there's amino acids shuttling in, and there's amino acids being recycled. Your body has essential tissues and non-essential tissues. This is like one of my favorite examples of the universal intelligence that exists within nature. It's not just humans, but life itself has this universal intelligence. And so humans, the body has this intelligence to say, okay, I'm fasting. I haven't had protein for X amount of time. My body's constantly repairing. I need more amino acids. So it's got an intelligence to know we're going to preserve essential tissues, organs, for example, and let me break down non-essential tissues, right? So the non-essential tissues would be cells that were already dying close to death. So maybe the entire cell gets broken down and recycled. Or you have certain organelles within cells that were otherwise doing pretty well, but maybe the mitochondria, the battery within it needs to be rebuilt. And so the cell has enough intelligence to go ahead and break that down. The cell's still alive, and then it breaks down those organelles and those cells for amino acids to be shuttled for new tissues. Freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And what's even more amazing is when you finally eat and you finally have that stimulus protein, which is why I like a nice, easy bone broth soup after a long fast. You hit it with the bone broth, you get some protein, you get some amino acids. Now the body has a growth signal, but not just like muscle, but literally the cells that were recycled and broken down, the organelles, will rebuild. So talk about literally rebuilding yourself from the ground up. That's what cellular autophagy does. You can get into cellular autophagy from exercise. You can get into cellular autophagy from other stress, but you can only exercise so much. And that's one of the caveats to exercise is it takes time. Fasting not only doesn't take time, fasting actually gives you time. And it does many other things besides cellular autophagy. That process in and of itself is anti-inflammatory. It reduces inflammation. It promotes healing. It's regenerative. It's reparative. Many people have talked about the amazing benefits of fasting, the healing and cleansing, and even the spiritual connection to as well. Many religions incorporate fasting into their regimen. Many of the earliest doctors spoke, Hippocrates spoke, let food be thy medicine, and let absence of food be thy medicine. And so they were proponents of fasting. Many, many, many philosophies incorporate this concept of taking breaks from food. So it's very powerful. The combination of both of those two, I go back to when we started this episode. I just cannot see an optimal health. Like someone says, okay, Dr. Jones, what are the tenets for being healthy overall? Like not even necessarily a weight loss.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm already at a great weight. Fasting would be unequivocally in my top two things.
What I can't see is any lucid, coherent individual who actually listened to this entire podcast not want to immediately get involved with some type of fasting, especially if they're on a GLP-1. Give me the code, spin open the vault, open it up, and give me the FLOA roadmap, right? Like, what does the program itself look like, and what makes it the end-all be-all for what we believe we can do for someone's permanent result?
I think we've just kind of put it all together because I think we've kind of sprinkled the pieces around. You start off with intermittent fasting, and we recommend ideally, optimally for our patients who are more in need of help and support, put them on a GLP-1, like semaglutide or tirzepatide, and then we use a powerful fat mobilizing agent like AOD 9604. We haven't talked about that much, but we had that episode about fat loss peptides. in essence, AOD is mobilizing body fat. This is what we talked earlier about insulin resistance. Insulin resistance decreases the ability for a body to mobilize body fat. That's poor metabolic flexibility. So I think of AOD as metabolic flexibility in a bottle. The GLP-1 does so much to make the fasting easier, but the AOD just hits that last piece, that angle of reducing the stress of fasting, which is a really big deal for anybody that's already stressed out trying to do this, like an autoimmune patient, or women. Women during their cycle have a certain period of their cycle, day 13 to 15 with ovulation, or day 18 to 28 during that progesterone phase. Got to give a big shout out to Dr. Vinnie Pels because I've learned so much from her. And I know one day our paths are going to cross. And I'm going to share with her, hey, while I 100% believe what you're saying because I have patients not on GLP-1s and peptides, the majority of my patients are on GLP-1s and peptides, and they don't run into nearly as much of an issue, if at all, that she's experiencing, because I know she's not working with the peptides or medication to the degree I am. I'm just lucky enough to have practitioners on staff who are completely in agreement with me, so I get to coach them. It's funny, they always come to me and like, hey, what's happening when we change their dose? Like, what are you seeing? And so, I know what dose they're on, and I get to coach them. So I've really had just such an amazing opportunity to see. And so anyways, AOD or one of the growth hormone peptides like samorelin, tesamorelin, or CJC ipamorelin, a fat mobilizing peptide, a GLP-1, pair it right from day one, start with intermittent fasting, and increase the intensity. So once they're comfortable with intermittent fasting, which most people right out the gates can do that, then we get into stage 2, 24-hour fasting. So if they've never done a 24-hour fast, we get them comfortable with a singular 24-hour fast. Great. Can you do it 3 days later? Oh, I can't. Okay, fine. Next week, try it again. Once you can do 2 24-hour fasts in a single week, and you're like, okay, great. Like, I can do this. What's next? I'm ready for the final hump. Yes, there's a final hump. The flow stage is where we get our patients into that 36-hour up to 48 hours. So this is a big deal. You fast from Tuesday night to Wednesday night, and you go to bed Wednesday night, not having eaten all day. And I'll tell you, a lot of people have never done that in their entire life. A lot of people will never do that in their entire life. It is so satisfying, rewarding, and you accomplish. But I will say this, you feel empty for the first thing. Like, yeah, I've had patients back, Dr. Jones, like, I can do this? Like, I haven't eaten all day? Like, so yeah, like, you're not going to float away. Don't worry. You're not going to float away like a bag in the wind. Like, you have plenty of fat on your body, Mary. I'm just letting you know. And, yeah, so there's that sort of psychological piece of just realizing, like, you can do this. Yeah, you totally can. It just becomes easier. It becomes easier over time. So we get the patient into that long weekly fast. Once you wake up the next morning, you are in the flow stage. When you think about it, dinner to dinner is 24. You wake up, now that's about 34, 32. Even if you eat breakfast that first time you do it, okay, fine. That was a long fast. You bring it down from twice a week back to once a week. And then every week you're just trying to increase that to somewhere around 48. Look, there's no magic research that was ever done on this. And why do I harp on 48? Honestly, years of doing it on individuals, I had to pick a number. 2 days just, made the most amount of sense. So 48 is the target, and we customize it and tailor it to each individual depending on which coaching tier they have with us. But somewhere around 48 is where I really see the magic happen of fixing insulin resistance and reducing inflammation, becoming fat adapted, helping the muscle mass, preventing cancer, strengthening the immune system. I can go on and on and on and on. There's so many benefits, but just focusing on the weight loss piece of it, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. That's what the FLOA protocol is. I know we're out of time. It's not just the fasting alone. All the other pieces matter. The reducing the consumption of processed foods. I actually, in addition to that aggressive fasting, still want to put them on a ketogenic diet for the other 5 days because we have the powerful 2 days of not eating food. So then what are you going to hit your body with 5 more days? If you hit it with food that's also not raising insulin, raising blood glucose, you're just maximizing the healing opportunity. If you're dealing with somebody who's got broken, damaged, whatever you would call insulin resistant receptors, I don't know if they're broken or damaged. Probably not, because that constitutes that they can't recover. And I think there's a lot of potential for recovery, but resistant receptors, well, why not give it the most opportunistic scenario to heal? So come in the next 5 days. Don't eat a bunch of carbs the next 5 days because, well, that's kind of the opposite of what you're trying to do with the fasting. So yeah, we come in, we hit them with keto. We're eating less processed foods, eating whole, unnatural, unprocessed foods. We put them on a nice, solid resistance training program to stimulate the muscles because muscles are extremely important. We put them on a good supplement protocol so that we address micronutrient deficiencies, things like magnesium, vitamin D, fish oil, a good multi. Like, we don't need to go crazy with the supplement list because you really can't.
Right.
Get the core supplements and then optimize your supplements for there. We're handling stress issues. We're optimizing sleep. The mindset, we talked about that. Like, mindset is always a big piece of it. And then addressing inflammatory issues. For example, utilizing low dose naltrexone for a patient that has an autoimmune disease. Very, very vital because inflammation can be an entire roadblock. And then finally, optimizing hormones like testosterone, like thyroid. You need this whole, and I call this the 10 pillars of lasting weight loss. Every individual is going to hit it with one or a combo of those different pillars. And I think fasting is the most powerful of those tools, probably up there with eating less processed foods, reducing ultra processed seed oils, that all, is all in that category. But I think this is the most powerful tool that you could possibly do with or without GLP-1 meds.
If I said anything else, it would just detract from the very important message that you just gave. Let's leave it there.
Sounds good.